By this point, you should have installed Unity and the Ravenfield modding tools. Go to where you installed Unity and open this file path. Assets, RF Tools, Models, Character. And open the Hand.Blend. This is the arm rig you'll use to animate with. Press A to select everything, then Ctrl C to copy. Create a new scene with Ctrl N. And delete everything in that scene. Then paste with Ctrl V. This will make your Blender UI use the new modern format, which is what I use, and will be easy to follow along with while I do in the video. Select the camera object, then switch to the camera tab. You can change your camera's field of view value here. I play at 90 FOV, so that's why I changed the camera's FOV too. Change clip start to 0.01 meters. Then go to Viewport Display, Composition Guides, and enable Center. Press 0 on your number pad, or press the circular camera icon to enable camera view. You should see the composition guides we enabled that will help you with positioning your animations. In the Scene tab, you can change the frame rate you'll be animating at. The vanilla weapons were animated at 24 FPS, but I animated my weapons at 30 FPS. The number you choose is personal preference. Now I recommend saving over your original Hand.Blend file with the new one we just made. With your animation scene still open, you can open another instance of Blender and open your weapon model. Select all of your weapon model and copy and paste it into your animation scene. Before I cover the required animations for weapon mod, I'm going to cover some important information you should keep in mind. First, you cannot adjust the camera's position or rotation. Moving the camera in any way will offset your entire weapon mod's animations and you'll need to remake them. Second, you must apply rotation and scale of your weapon model before you begin animating. If your weapon model isn't facing the correct direction, select the body of the weapon, press R to rotate. Press Z while rotating to lock the rotation along the Z axis. Press S to begin scaling if the model is too big or too small. Select all of your weapon model, then press Ctrl A and choose to apply scale and rotation. If you don't apply scale and rotation before animating, your first-person arms will not display properly in-game. Lastly, being good at animation takes a lot of time and practice. My first animations were pretty awful. My current animation skill level is still pretty bad, but slightly better. When you're first starting out, you should take inspiration from how other games have animated their own weapons, and use references whenever possible. I'll link to other video tutorials covering view model animation in Blender so you can learn more about the animation workflow and process. To summarize what I've learned from my short time animating, most view model animation is a combination of moving, pressing G, and rotating, pressing R, the weapon model and the first-person rig. The most important aspects of good, or at least aesthetically pleasing animation, is visual clarity and pacing. You want to make sure animation is easy for the player to tell what's supposed to be happening. Make sure you look at the animation through the camera's view. Keep in mind the pacing and timing of your actions. Try to perform the action you want to animate with your hands and count the seconds as you perform. Doing this will help give you an estimate of how long the animation should be. Lastly, there's no get good at animating quick guide. Animating is a skill that takes time to develop. The first thing I recommend doing is setting up the idle pose of your weapon. In camera view, position the weapon model along the bottom right diagonal line. Select your weapon model and press G to move the weapon model around. Move the weapon along the Y axis to bring the weapon closer or farther from the camera. Next, move the armature down the Z axis so the hands aren't so high up. With the armature still selected, press Ctrl Tab to switch to pose mode. In pose mode, you can position and rotate the bones of the RF first-person rig. Select the palm of the right hand and go to the Bone Constraint tab. Add a new Child of constraint and set the object to the main weapon body. Now you can move the right palm to the weapon's grip. Here I use Snap to Vertex to quickly move the palm to the grip. Change the Snap to Vertex and hold Ctrl to move the selected object over to where your mouse is. Switch back to object mode by pressing Ctrl Tab again. When you move and rotate the weapon model's body, the right hand will move along with it. You can repeat this process for the left palm, except assign the weapon's magazine so you can animate a reload with the left hand. If the palm is too far away, the rest of the hand won't reach the palm. To fix this, reposition the shoulder so the entire arm is closer. To adjust the fingers, you have to move the tips of the index and pinky bones. Ravenfield doesn't have individual fingers, so it can be a bit of a struggle making the heat-proof oven mitts look good. Once you've got a pose you like, press A to select all bones in the rig. Press I and insert a keyframe for location, rotation, and scale. Go back into object mode by pressing Ctrl Tab. Select all objects, and insert a keyframe, also for location, rotation, and scale. In the timeline, select all the keyframes on frame 1 and press Shift D to duplicate and drag the new keyframes later down the timeline. You've now made an idle pose, and it'd be a good time to save your scene as a new blend file. A trick I use to make an easy idle pose is copying the finger positions from the vanilla weapons. If you've already installed the modding tools, you can find the vanilla weapons inside Unity's installs, Assets, RF Tools, Models, Blender source.zip file. I'll be using the AK's idle fingers, so open up that particular blend file. Move the timeline to 0 to display the idle pose. Select the armature and enter pose mode. Press Alt-Z to enable X-ray mode. Select both hands, copy the pose. Now, in my weapon file, go back into pose mode, select the hands, and paste the pose. The palms will be misaligned, but easy enough to reposition and fix. Now that my idle pose has been decided, I enable auto keying. Auto keying automatically makes a keyframe whenever I move, rotate, or scale any object in the scene. I want the aim in animation to be slightly under half a second, so I move the timeline down under 10 frames. In object mode, move your gun so the iron sight aligns with the center of the camera's composition guides. The composition guides only show up inside the camera view. I move the gun along the Y-axis so the iron sights are a bit closer to the camera. Like for the idle pose, duplicate your aim keyframe with Shift D and have the aim pose last a few frames. You don't have to adjust the animation transition between idle and aiming, but leaving it as looks static. In between the transition, I rotate the weapon and move it slightly. To view the animation on loop, I adjust the timeline start and end frame in the bottom right corner. Once you're satisfied with your aim pose and transition, select your idle keyframe and duplicate it to be after your aim pose. Doing this will reset your weapon back to idle so you continue making animations. The Unholster animation plays every time the weapon is equipped. You'll want to keep that in mind as you decide how long the animation should last. It's possible to make a unique Unholster animation that only plays when you first spawn, so I'll be making 2 Unholster animations. The unique Unholster is possible thanks to the nefarious Dr. H's script. There will be a video in the future showing how to use it. For the first frame of your Unholster animation, the weapon model must be outside of the camera's view. The final frame of your Unholster animation must be your idle pose. The length of the entire animation is up to you to decide. For the first Unholster, I'm making the player pull back the charging handle and check the gun's bolt. To get the general timing of the animation, I perform the action myself and count it in my head how many seconds it takes for me to complete the action. Then I make a rough blockout of the animation. I work on making the large motions look good, then move on to smaller details after. During the initial animation process, I focus on how the weapon's body, any crucial components, and the player's hands move. What I look for the most is how clearly the player can tell what the animation is supposed to represent. When I first made the player pull back the charging handle, the right hand covered the bolt, which made the animation not readable, so I had to spend much more time repositioning the hand and the weapon's body so the player could see the bolt moving back. If it's your first time animating, I'd recommend watching and trying to recreate how other games have animated their weapons, so you have a general goal to work towards. After getting the initial motion to look how I want, I'm now working on the smaller details like moving the charging handle. To make the charging handle move in a straight line no matter the weapon's current orientation, I changed my scene's transform orientation to local. That way, moving along the X, Y, and Z axes will always be based on the selected object's current orientation. Global orientation makes movement always be the same no matter the current rotation. Global orientation wouldn't work for the animation I'm making, because the charging handle will clip through the weapon model. Your sprinting animation can actually be a single pose, because the game handles the weapon locomotion when you sprint. For the sake of uniqueness, I'll be making my own looping sprint animation. To make a looping animation, you need to first make a transition from the idle pose to the first frame of the loop. And the first frame of the loop must match the last frame of the loop. Remember, duplicate the keyframes with Shift D and not copying and pasting. I've run into issues with copying and pasting not properly transferring locations. Since this is a sprint animation, it will be shorter than the Unholster animation. The sprint loop I'm making will last 20 frames, and the middle of the loop is the farthest the gun will shift during the sprint. In between the first half of the loop, I make the gun dip downward and rotate slightly to the air, then duplicate that dip and move the keyframe to the second half of the loop. The dip between the loops are meant to represent the players stepping with each foot as they sprint. Once again, you don't have to make a looping animation, just a single pose for the sprint is fine too. For this weapon mod, I'll be making an advanced reload, meaning there will be different reload animations depending on if the gun is empty or partially empty before reloading. A basic weapon mod would only need one reload animation, but I'm going to cover this topic for those of you who want to know how to add a more realistic mechanic to your weapon mod. Your reload animation will likely be your most time-consuming and complex animation you'll make. The best advice I can give is use and watch references of other weapon reloads, and to take your time. If you want to have an advanced reload mechanic, it's easier to make the empty reload animation first, then duplicate the entire animation but adjust it so the player doesn't chamber a new round. If you're making a weapon mod that has rounds manually inserted, like a shotgun for example, you'll want to break your animation into 3 actions. First action is making the weapon transition from idle to round loading pose. Second action, which needs to loop, will be the rounds being loaded into the gun. Third action is either closing the bolt, pumping the shotgun again, or just returning to idle pose. If you're making this type of reload, instead of making the palm of the hand constrained to the magazine, you'd want it to be constrained to the bullet or shell instead. If you're trying to make a more complex reload, such as a Call of Duty style tactical reload where there's 2 magazines on screen and the player swaps between them, like this animation, then good luck. For this weapon model, I made a small separate cube object called Mag Parent, located inside the magazine, and made the weapon body the parent of the cube. Then, I made the cube the parent of the magazine by first selecting the magazine model, then selecting the cube, and finally pressing Ctrl P and choosing Keep Transform. It's important to use the Keep Transform option so the magazine keeps its default position inside the gun. Now, duplicate the magazine and rename it if you want. In the hands armature, you'll want to parent the left palm to the mag parent cube made earlier. This is assuming you'll be mag swapping with the left hand, by the way. When you want to animate the mag removal and insertion, you move the cube so the magazine and hand animate properly. As for the magazine swap, that was all done manually. I had to position the magazine and the hand so neither object clipped into each other, and to make sure the overall movement was still smooth and visually clear to the player. The new magazine should take the location and rotation of the old magazine, so when the cube moves back into its default position, the magazine will be inserted correctly. This type of reload is pretty complex and would take a lot of practice to successfully animate. For the kicking animation, you need to move your gun away from the center of the screen. There's no way to import the kick animation and model for reference, so this animation may be trial and error. Just note that the kick foot will have display priority over the weapon's animation, and the foot model will display on top of the weapon if you don't move the weapon away enough. There's 2 types of squad animation Ravenfield uses, Squad Call and Squad Direct. Squad Call makes your squad regroup to your position. This plays when you hold the squad button and look down on your feet. Squad Direct orders your squad to perform a context-sensitive action. They can attack or defend a flag, go to a designated location, or attack a specified soldier or vehicle. You can just make one animation and reuse it for the Call and Direct. Some weapons will have a slide or bolt move back when you fire the weapon. Some guns will require you to pump or pull the bolt manually to chamber a new round. That is when you want to make a fire animation. Just like it sounds, this animation plays every time the weapon is fired. If your gun needs to be manually chambered, you should make a fire animation while aiming down sights as well. Not all guns will need a fire animation, but you can use it to animate weapon recoil too.